Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Sophie, what do you mean you can't? You know your mother won't be happy. She was counting on your help. Sophie knew that Emily would not only be displeased, she would be furious. Jack, I really can't. I feel so bad that I think I'm going to fall over. I wonder why you got so sick just when my mother is waiting for us. Sophie, it was terribly frustrating that my husband didn't care about her or her condition, but about her mommy, who continued to torment her even after they were separated. Jack thought very much of her. After she and Jack announced that they were taking a mortgage, Emily, as Sophie called her to herself, almost had a heart attack. Well, of course. After Jack made Sophie happy, all the work around the house, Emily gave it to her. She hadn't really bothered with cooking and cleaning before. Now she had given up everything, and all that was left in her life was Jack and soaps. And a couple of hours, of course, to eat Sophie's brain. After they did move in, Sophie's job was to clean the apartment on the other side of town. Emily was a real messy girl. By the time Sophie arrived, the dishes were all dirty. The kitchen looked like it had been greased on cockroaches. That said, there was also other food using by the stains and debris on the table and the floor. Sophie could unmistakably tell what the older woman was cooking for the week. Sometimes Sophie seemed, though no. She was sure that Emily was making such a mess on purpose so that Sophie would have to try harder. And she tried. What was left for her to do? She wasn't going to tell Jack. I'm not going. It would be kind of ugly. Jack sometimes even apologized to her. Really, so that her mother, God forbid, would not hear. But that was enough for Sophie, because for Jack it was already a feat. Jack, I got sick 2 weeks ago. I've been patient, but now I just can't take it anymore. If you had been a little more attentive to your wife, of course you would have noticed everything. Sophie, don't be ridiculous. Of course I would have noticed if you weren't feeling well. Maybe we could just reschedule for tomorrow. Mom won't be very happy, of course, but we're all human. Sophie sighed how much she wanted to fall down and just sleep. A day or two, but no less. She'd been very sleepy all week. She was ashamed to admit it. She had fallen asleep on the job twice. Okay, Jack, but I can't promise 100% for sure. I don't know how I'll be tomorrow. You'll be fine. You'll get some rest, and that's it. Sophie barely made it home and immediately sank down on the couch. All she could do was to throw her coat on the floor. Almost immediately she fell asleep. She heard Jack come in, rattling the pot unhappily. After all, she hadn't made a fresh dinner, and he had to eat yesterday's stuffed cabbage rolls. He came into the room several times, but Sophie didn't turn around. Jack sighed loudly and walked back into the kitchen. She no longer heard him settle down. She fell back into sleep. In the morning, she woke up as if nothing had happened yesterday. Jack was right. She just needed to rest. But that's okay. I had 2 days off. Get some sleep. And then Sophie remembered Emily. She couldn't not go. Sophie was about to rush into her room to lie down and tell her that nothing had gone wrong. But Jack came into the kitchen. Sophie, what are you stomping around for? Mom has already called twice. Get dressed there for tea. Sophie sighed, arguing and explaining something is absolutely useless. She went to get dressed. As she passed her husband, she muttered, "Good morning to you too." Jack looked at her in surprise. What was that supposed to mean? Emily met them on the landing. Did they remember me? Of course they did. Who needs me now? Can I go months without visiting my mother? Jasko kissed his mother on the cheek. Mom, don't yell. You know it wasn't my fault we couldn't make it yesterday. I know, Jack, and it's a shame your wife will gradually separate us altogether. Jack sighed sorrowfully. 3 minutes later, he and his mother were already sitting on the couch watching television. Sophie was left with nothing to do. How to start cleaning? Jack never even tried to help her. Today was hard for her. So hard that she wanted to cry. She picked up the trash, came into Jack's room to take out the trash. He turned to her in meaning. Sophie felt such resentment rise in her soul. It made her eyes go dark. Take out the trash. Jack stood up, but Emily yanked him back to her son. You don't go to my place, do you? It won't fracture. Sophie slowly took off her gloves, folded them neatly, and told her husband, I'm going home. You're done here without me. She saw the look in her mother-in-law's eyes. Yes, for that look, Sophie would give half her life. She dressed quickly. She could hear her mother-in-law's voice picking up hysterical notes in the room. Of course, Sophie also had to cook her a delicious meal. The woman quickly descended the stairs and immediately felt tired. What on earth was this? She cleaned 2 apartments before, and even after work. And no matter what. But now she couldn't move a muscle, and that was it. No energy at all. She decided to go to the seafront and sit there, get some air. It was her day off. Why not spend it on herself? Sophie resolutely made her way to the park. On the way, she bought a large ice cream, walking and smiling to the unknown. She didn't notice that a man was looking at her, watching and smiling too. Sophie sat down on a vacant bench and happily stretched out her legs and began to eat the ice cream. Her mood was getting better by the second. How nice it was when Emily and Jack weren't around. Sophie. She stopped eating the ice cream. How is it that she feels good when her husband isn't around? But it's not right. It's not right. They made a vow. She tried to banish the silly thoughts and went back to the ice cream. Nothing mattered at all right now. Someone sat down next to her. Sophie wanted to be alone, of course. But on the other hand, the bench was big. So there's plenty of room for everyone. You're so good, I wanted ice cream too. Sophie turned her head in surprise. A man in his 40s was sitting next to her, smiling openly. She hadn't talked to anyone in such a long time. Emily's house of work. The woman was confused, embarrassed, and the man laughed. You do not think. I will not take away your ice cream. I bought some too. And he showed a big cone. Sophie laughed. She did not know how she did it. Sophie was immediately embarrassed and turned away. She didn't want to be laughing with strange men here. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. That's all right. The bench wasn't just for me. They ate their ice cream in silence for a while. And Sophie watched him from the corner of her eye. Quite handsome, sturdy, well-dressed. Arms with long fingers, but not fragile, but strong. She noticed that the man was looking at her too, and quickly averted her gaze. My name is Michael. It's my first day off in 2 weeks, and I wanted to make the most of it. Sophie smiled involuntarily. Do you think ice cream would do much good? The man laughed. Well, why not? I am not on a diet, and I very rarely eat ice cream. So it's exactly what you need to lift your spirits. Maybe you're right. You didn't tell me how I could refer to you, Sophie. Sophie immediately scolded herself. She couldn't have said Madeline or Kayla. She wasn't going to have a relationship with him anyway. A rare name these days. She shrugged her shoulders. A common name. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to go. Sophie saw the disappointment on the man's face, but she knew she didn't need all this. She had a husband. She had a family. She stood up abruptly and felt everything swirling in her head. The river swam somewhere, and her legs became soft. The next moment she fainted and collapsed under the man's feet. Michael stared at her for a second, then set the ice cream aside and crouched beside her. He took her pulse with one hand and called for an ambulance with the other. People were running toward her on all sides. Sophie woke up toward evening. She opened her eyes to the window in front of her, and there was the sunset. The woman didn't understand anything. She remembered the park. She remembered that man. But how had she ended up here? Where is this place anyway? How do you feel? She turned her head. It was the same man, only in a white coat and cap. Who are you? Where am I? Sophie tried to get up. Immediately, all sorts of unimaginable thoughts entered her head. The white coats had taken her somewhere. So she was to be experimented on. This is not normal. That's why he approached her in the park. But he couldn't get up. Not only was she dizzy, she was also nauseous. She leaned back exhaustedly on the pillow. What do you want? Michael smiled at me. Completely nothing. But you just vitally need a complete checkup. How long have you had that? Excuse me, I'll introduce myself again. Michael, I'm a doctor, and you're in the first hospital right now. Sophie felt so relieved that she even exhaled. Michael looked at her strangely. What did you think? Well, she couldn't tell him what she thought, could she? Now she was already looking at her roommates and some medical equipment and windows, which, by the way, had no fences or bars on them. I was just scared of nothing. He put his hand on hers. Don't be afraid of anything. Now we'll take all the tests, and we'll find out what happened to you. Just tell me, how long have you been feeling ill? Sophie began to tell me, and was suddenly surprised that she herself felt ill. She hadn't been paying attention for some time. I don't dwell on it. But when Michael began to ask leading questions and she answered, it was scary. What was wrong with her? When he left, Sophie almost cried. What was she going to do now? What if it was something serious? One of her roommates sat down with her. Don't worry. Michael is the best in town. He said he'd find out what's wrong, so he will. I'm not worried. Sophie grinned. No one's going to cry much, if anything. Well, don't say that kids, at least they're not little kids. There are no kids. The neighbor shut up, then said it'll be okay. Don't worry about it. A nurse came to get Sophie, asked her to sit in a chair. Yes, I'll walk myself. You can't have that kind of order. When the labs are done, you're gonna have to jump right in. You can't do it now. The same neighbor waved her hand. Sit down. Don't argue. We all used to ride like this. Well, if everyone, then she'll go too. Sophie didn't get back to her room until 2 hours later. Your phone is going off in your bag. Sophie flinched. It's not like she hadn't warned Jack. Quickly opening her bag, she grabbed the phone just as it started ringing again. Yes, Sophie, are you what? Are you out of your mind? Where are you? What do you think you're doing? Jack, don't yell. So don't yell. You hurt my mother. Do you have any idea what that's like? Jack, I'm in the hospital. In the hospital. And what are you doing there? Can I ask you something? I fainted in the street, and they brought me here. Jack was silent for a few seconds. Then I asked, a little more quietly, when are you going to be released? It's a mess at home, and you haven't prepared anything for your mother. Sophie was speechless for a while. Then she said, Jack, can you hear me? I'm telling you, I'm in the hospital. I'm sick. Do you understand? I understand. I'm not stupid. I asked you a normal question. When did I go home? Sophie didn't say anything else. She just passed out, lay down, and turned to the wall. It was so hurtful and so frustrating that the tears rolled down by themselves. She could hear the neighbors talking, the clinking of dishes. Then someone took her by the shoulder. Stop thinking sad thoughts. Get up. Let's go to tea. We have a tradition here before going to bed to talk. The neighbors laughed, and Sophie had no choice but to get up. Her stomach rumbled. One of the women looked at her suspiciously. Had you eaten today? Sophie shrugged her shoulders. Ice cream. Great. And then they faint. That's not surprising at all. Let me make you a nice sandwich. What's this? Water and candy. She wasn't much older than Sophie. Walked out the door of the room. She came back in a minute, carrying sausage, butter, and a container of meatballs. That's true. There's no way to heat it up because Cerberus is on duty today. She's watching our figures better than we are. My name, by the way, Hannah, was a cheerful little tall, lush woman. Looking at her, I got the impression that she has no problems, and all the problems she sees themselves disperse such a solid ball of positivity. And I'm Caitlin. I have a salad, by the way. They just brought it in the evening. I have not put it in the fridge yet. Not 5 minutes later, as between the beds were shifted stools and set an improvised table. When the water in the jar was boiling, Hannah took out the kettle and said, "We drink coffee in the evening. Who wants some in the morning? If Michael smells it getting everyone, he's treating our blood pressure, and we don't want to go home." Hannah laughed. "Well, that's what he tells us." Sophie ate a whole multi-story sandwich with such gusto that Hannah asked, "How about one more?" No, I'm bursting now. It's really good." They laughed. "You're just the one who's hungry. What's delicious in there?" "The usual sausage." They sat for a long time. Sophie learned that Caitlin has 3 children and a creepy husband who likes to drink, but also works and Caitlin loves. Hannah has one daughter that no way to get along with because the age transition husband is nice. "I think so." "Well, what about you?" "What? I have a husband and his mother too." "What's that?" "Well, we live separately, but I feel like Emily is always with us." Hannah sighed. "Don't be offended by me, but you should have put your mother-in-law in her place. Mine's a big shot too. And my son kept talking me out of it. Since they drove me out like that, we hadn't been married for a year yet. So she came to visit, and they were sitting with her husband. This is me doing it wrong. This is me doing it wrong. My cutlets are not very juicy. I could not stand it, so I slapped my husband on the back with a frying pan and told my mother-in-law to take her son away. Otherwise, I might as well give her back. For 12 years, we've been living together, laughing together. How do we remember that day?" Caitlin laughed at Hannah. "Well, you'll teach her, and then she'll go to jail, and you'll be guilty. You'll stay." My mother-in-law was gold. She knew that if I didn't keep her son in line, he'd be finished. Sophie listened and smiled. There were 2 women sitting in front of her. Both are sort of cursing at their husbands, but with such love. And it is obvious that the husbands are good. Clearly, the husband made a salad, all sliced and crooked, but he did it to feed his wife, to please her. In the morning, Caitlin and Hannah knocked on the door and looked at each other in surprise. Their husbands were at work at this time. Sophie shouted to come into the room. Jack walked in. "Hi." He walked over to Sophie's bed and crouched down. Then he kissed her on the cheek. He looked confused. "I waited for you yesterday, waited for you." "Jack, I told you I was in the hospital, that the doctor says nothing yet. The tests will be ready. Then will she say when they will be?" Jack looked like a parrot. Sophie was tired of his complicated questions. She covered her eyes. Her husband looked at her confusedly, catching the glances of her neighbors. Sophie fumbled. "Can I get you anything?" "You tell me what I need." "I need slippers." "I'll write you some of the stuff now." Jack took a piece of paper. "Well, call me right away." "How will you know when you're going home?" "Okay." On the threshold of the room, he turned around. "Sophie, you call your mother and apologize to her." Sophie wondered what for. "How did she run away?" "You didn't say goodbye." "Jack, it's not that hard for you." He went out, and Sophie stared at the door. Her roommates joined her right away. "Don't get upset. They men are so helpless when they are without their wives." Sophie sighed. "I guess it's a good thing I went to the hospital." I look at Jack now, and I don't know why I haven't seen it all these years. We have kids, you know, why not? At first we lived with his mother. I'm from the country myself, but she said no kids, or you'd be out on the street. Then we took out a mortgage. I won't tell you what I had to do to convince Jack to take that step. Anyway, we moved out. And we can't have kids again, because now there's a loan, and the baby needs a lot of money to raise. And because I understand what he says to his mother, in other words, and how to change her mind. I do not understand. Now I'm 33 years old. Well, I finally understand what kind of person Jack and his mom. And what am I supposed to do? So, the chance of having a baby is minimal. Caitlin sighed in that setting. Yeah, Sophie got you, but I'll tell you what. Women have babies at 40, and they start a new life at 45. Oh, what a new life. Oh, come on. I'm used to him. He's not a bad guy. It's just that his mother ate his brain. Hannah laughed. No, sweetheart, you need to stay in the hospital longer. Maybe ask to have your head fixed some more. Sophie laughed too. From the outside, it wasn't that scary. It seemed easier with a smile. The next day, Jack brought everything on the list and a fish pie. Sophie smiled sadly. Mom was baking. Yes, Mama tried. Emily knew perfectly well that Sophie hated fish, and if she ate it, she would throw up all the time. Tell your mom. Thank you so much. Of course I will. I'm gonna go, Jack. We don't know anything about the tests yet. No, the doctor said tomorrow. In the evening, Sophie went for a walk in the hospital park. She felt weak, but much better. She walked down the deserted alley, then sat down on a bench, reflecting. She and Jack had met in the cafeteria, in the regular cafeteria, where she often went for lunch. Jack sat down with her because there were no seats. Girlfriend, may I? He was a good-looking guy, and Sophie nodded with a smile. Sure. Quietly, they got to talking. It turned out that Jack worked in the same factory as she did. Only upstairs was what they called the building where their bosses sat. Jack was in charge of product sales. That evening, when she went out after work, Jack was already waiting for her. Basically, they never parted ways again. They spent the night at Sophie's little rented apartment, and then Jack said to Sophie, I have 2 women I love, you and Mom. It is very hard for me to be torn between you two. Why don't we get married and move back to my house? Of course, that wasn't the proposal Sophie was expecting, but she was excited. Jack was perfect in her eyes. Who did she see in her village? No one. The normal guys had left their hole at once. The only ones left were those who didn't care about themselves. The village was dying very fast. When Sophie was about to leave too after her grandmother died, half the houses were already empty. Do you have it? Sophie shuddered. She was so engrossed in memories that she had completely forgotten where she was. Sitting next to her was Michael. He was wearing a jacket over his white coat. He was handing her an ice cream. There were no ice cream cones, only cups. Sophie couldn't help smiling, took an ice cream cone, opened it, and bit into it with pleasure. Michael, you are a magician. Sophie, can I ask you a favor? Yes, of course. Let me just be there. He nodded at the hospital. It's just Michael here. Okay, it's a deal. Where did you find ice cream at this hour? He laughed. If I told you I waved over the fence, nailed a couple of ice cream cart owners, you wouldn't believe me. No, I wouldn't. Then I'll just have to admit that I bought it this morning on my way to work. Well, I don't know why. I guess I thought I could lure you and your ice cream out for a walk. Sophie laughed. I would have gone anyway. You women are unpredictable people. Don't you know that any man who's in the hospital just dreams of going outside for 5 minutes? Well, I do, of course. But what if it didn't work? Ice cream is already serious. Sophie was eating ice cream and thought it was the tastiest thing she had ever eaten. Michael looked at her. His chest just clenched in pity, in frustration over an unfair life. Just an hour ago, the test results came back. Basically, he suspected something similar. He just didn't think it was that bad. He immediately called his friend. He, too, was a doctor, but in a different field. Michael, I looked at what you sent me. I'll tell you right away, if there are miracles in the world, only a miracle can save this woman. That's how bad it is. You see, in a situation like this, anytime she gets sick again, she may not get up. She'll get weaker every day, no matter how many vitamins you give her. Michael, what are you gonna do? I don't understand. Who is she to you? Nobody, just acquaintances. Michael's voice trembled treacherously. Wait, I don't understand now. Our stalwart tin soldier surrendered. Michael hummed. Michael, how many times? But in fact, his name was indeed the stalwart tin soldier. In their company, which consisted entirely of doctors, one Michael was still unmarried. At the same time, he always said he had no intention of getting married. How many girlfriends had brought friends' wives to the holidays? How many introduced him? All to no avail. Michael was alone. And here he is, a man of principle, who never asks for anyone, asks for just an acquaintance. Let him tell it. Look, I won't promise anything, but I will call. I'll send some tests to a man tomorrow. Maybe he'll tell me something else. Now Michael looked at Sophie and didn't know how to tell her that she basically had 2 or 3 months to live, unless a miracle happened. And he, as a doctor, knew very well that there are no miracles. Sophie, do you have a dream? She looked at him in surprise. I don't know, a childhood one. Here, I always dreamed as a kid that when I grow up, regardless of who I will become, a parachute jump, and like all normal jump. And I even went into the army more than once. I even asked to serve myself. I could have done without it. And I was in the airborne troops. I did a lot of jumping, enough for a lifetime. She thought about it. I know. I was a little girl. I used to dream that when I grew up, I'd get a big dog, like a really big one. Grandma didn't like dogs. All we had was a cat named Mauricia. Michael looked at her with interest. And that you still haven't realized your dream. She threw up her hands. No, what kind of dog? It's like a child requires care and attention. And we're always at work. And then to keep a big dog in the apartment is a real cruelty to animals. Yeah, you're right. We should at least have a summer house. Sophie smiled. We kind of have one. Although it is almost 100 kilometers away from the city. We only went there a couple of times. Then my husband said that life outside of civilization doesn't appeal to him. So it stands. No one needs the house. It's a shame to sell. Because I grew up there, and there's no way to drive. Michael kept thinking about something. Then he decided he wasn't going to say anything today. Let him rest, sleep. Tomorrow he would have to. When Jack came in, Michael showed up in the room. I'm sorry, are you Sophie's husband? Yes, I am. What's the matter? Could you come in here, please? I have to tell Sophie, and she's not here yet. You'll see her later. When the men left, Hannah turned to Caitlin. What was that all about? Didn't you see how long our doctor was outside with Sophie yesterday? Well, of course I did. Of course I did. You think that's what we're talking about? I'm sure it is. Our Michael has fallen in love with Sophie. And because he's a decent man, he's about to spill it all to Jack. This isn't right. Sophie suffers from them as it is. How does she feel about Michael? Who knows? It's not like we talked about anything like that. Just as they were talking, Sophie appeared in the room. She had gone back to get some tests. What's this about? Where's my hubby? Or did he run away? Oh, Sophie had better run away. She looked at them in surprise. What's the matter? You speak normally, not in riddles. What? Our doctor sat with you under the moon last night, and he's a decent fellow, and he took your Jack to talk to you. Now he's going to tell him everything. Like, I can't love you, I can't fight you. Sophie sat down on the bed. But what if it is true? What if it is so? Sophie was sure of it, that he guessed what she really liked. She jumped up. Where did they go? We don't know. But invited Michael Jack into the office, Sophie flew out of the room and rushed to Michael's office. She opened the door, but the men didn't see her. Jack spoke. It just can't be. She never complained about anything. You probably just haven't noticed. She must have been this tired for at least 6 months. Doctor, how long? How long has she got? 3, maybe 2 months. So little. She'll be walking on her own the whole time. I can't say. Every time she loses consciousness, she could end up lying down. So we have to make sure she doesn't get nervous at all. Sophie knew at once that the conversation was about her. She had time to realize that she was going to be gone very soon. And passed out. Michael looked up at the knock and jumped up. She didn't want to come to her senses. It was better there. There, they didn't want to see her. They'd wanted her dead. Sophie, she opened her eyes. A frightened Jack was sitting beside the bed, and Michael was standing at the headboard. Sophie, we need to talk, and you need to pull yourself together. She sat down on the bed. Jack, I want to go home. But Sophie, what am I going to do with you at home? I have work to do. I can't be around all the time. I could see that Jack didn't like the idea of being around her. You don't have to be around me. I'll be fine. Alone, when I can't stand up anymore. You can take me to some hospice. But Jack, I want to go home. That's when Michael stepped in. Sophie, don't go crazy. You have to get treatment. You have to take every chance you can. She looked him straight in the eye. There are many chances. Michael averted his eyes. She stood up and began to gather her things. Hannah rushed to help her. Caitlin couldn't. She sat in a corner and fought back tears. When everything was packed, Sophie looked at her roommates and smiled. So, let's say goodbye. They hugged her and Hannah said, why say goodbye? I'm sure we'll see each other again. Sophie grinned sadly in the other world. Sophie kept silent. At home, Sophie lay down at once. She missed everything so much, and her husband included. But Jack tried not even to touch her. Not even to touch her. He made his bed in the great room. The woman wiped away her tears. Well, what to him, she was no longer alive. She hardly slept the night. She heard Jack talking to someone on the phone. Then I heard my mother. It all made sense. Mom suggests ways to get rid of Sophie. And frankly, she doesn't really care. Let him take her out into the woods. It's no big deal. One day sooner, one day later. Not a long stretch of time to fight over. She fell asleep in the morning, and when she woke up, Jack was gone, having just made herself a pot of tea when the doorbell rang. Sophie didn't even move. She was right. A minute later, after a few rings, the key to the door turned. Emily appeared on the kitchen doorstep. Sophie, I thought you were asleep. Hello, Emily, hello. She pressed her lips together mournfully. So how are you feeling? I'm fine. How come Jack married you, and you surprised him? You're a country girl, you're supposed to be healthy. Why did you set my son up like that? How's he gonna take care of you now? He's working, and I can't. You know how old you are, don't you? Emily was talking while she quickly made herself some tea, took butter and sausage out of the fridge and made herself a sandwich. What is there to look after? I kind of walk by myself for now. Just for now. And then what? You're gonna ruin that boy's life. Emily, I don't understand. What do you want me to do? Go to the garbage dump? It's my apartment too. Jack and I split the rent. If he doesn't like it, let him come live with you until it's over. You'll think of something too. And then we'll have to renovate the whole apartment. And that's a waste. As you understand, you won't have the money now. Sophie was so hurt. So hurt. She's not dying yet. And Emily, no longer embarrassed, discusses her death. And what comes after? Emily, you'd better get out of here. The older woman resentfully pressed her lips together, grabbed her jacket, but still couldn't just walk away. You know what I'll tell you. Sophie, you basically can't help yourself anymore. And that's where you should have thought about why you would want to ruin his life. Don't be selfish. Don't think about ruining his life. Think about being remembered with a good word. She jumped out and slammed the door loudly, and Sophie covered her face with her hands. How could that be? Why is it different for other people? She was well aware that her mother-in-law wouldn't calm down if she didn't say anything more to her. She would take it out on Jack. Sophie sat like that in the kitchen until evening. She didn't care so much about anything. She heard Jack come into the kitchen, say hello, look in the pots. Sophie thought that she certainly could have cooked something. The conversation with her mother-in-law had somehow thrown her off balance. She went silently into her room, lay down, and fell asleep at once. She woke up because Jack was on the phone again. Mom, how could I offer her that? And there hasn't been anybody in the house for a long time. Mom, I know she shouldn't care anymore. But you don't have to tell her like you don't, Mom. I'll do it. He shut off the phones, turned around, saw Sophie in the doorway. Did you hear everything? So much the better. Your mother and I think you should go to your village. There's fresh air and everything. He made a vague gesture with his hand in the air. Sophie looked at him and didn't understand how she could ever marry him. It wasn't even animalistic. Sending a man to die somewhere far away. Sophie knew exactly what kind of life awaited her. Here she would constantly see eyes that would ask her, "Soon you will set us free." I wanted to live these months differently, even if it's only 2 or 3. Jack, if I'm bothering you here, you can take me to the Sophie dump. You don't have to exaggerate. I'm not talking about the dump. It's a nice house you got there. You must have neighbors. You'll breathe the air, drink milk from the cow, and I'll visit you. She laughed. You want to get rid of me, and yet you say you'll visit me. You're trying to put me at ease enough to make me say yes. I'll go along with it. I can't bear to see your and your mommy's faces. Sophie went back to her room, lay down. She turned her back against the wall. Why? Why was this happening to her? Why? In the morning, Jack woke her up. Sophie, wake up. Need to go where? She looked at him in surprise. Where to? To the country. I am not even packed. Don't worry, I packed everything. She grinned. At least we can drink tea. Sophie, why are you doing this? I bought groceries for you too. He looked at her as if he was waiting for praise. Sophie wanted to hit him. All the way. He kept talking about how she would be happy there, that he would come often, that he would bring her everything she needed. As if he didn't just want to convince himself, but Sophie as well. She, on the other hand, was sure that once Jack left, she would never see him again. The village greeted them on a beautiful spring morning. The sun was shining so brightly that Jack had to take out his sunglasses. Sophie grinned. No, isn't he handsome? A real man. At least, that's what he looked like. No one would think he was taking his wife away from home to die. To get out of the way, Jack stopped the car in front of the house. Strange. Even the weeds hadn't grown yet. The grass is tall, sure, but not too tall. Jack quickly carried the bags to the house. Sophie just stood there. I take it you're not even coming in. Sophie, I have to go to work, but you know I'll be sure to visit you in a few days. Jack reached for her lips, but Sophie pulled away. Go. You shouldn't waste your time on me. Sophie, why would you do that? You'll see, you'll be much better off here. Sophie smiled at Jack's back. He ran toward the car as if Sophie had some kind of contagion. The car disappeared, raising a cloud of dust, and Sophie walked toward the house. Strangely enough, she did feel fine. The door opened eagerly, and Sophie squeezed her way in through the narrow passage because her bags wouldn't let her open the door any wider. She had always loved order, and now she was sort of pleased to see the perfect order in the house, covered in a layer of dust. But that was okay. Nothing major needed to be done. Just wipe and wash everything. She had even brought her bedding with her, or rather, Jack had put it in for her. I saw it sticking out of her bag. It's the owners can help, which one is needed. I for a small nominal fee is ready, just a little hangover. The door opened and a shaggy-haired man appeared on the threshold. Sophie looked at him, realizing she knew exactly who it was, but who it was she couldn't figure out. Sophie, are you? The man looked at her bewildered, spreading the fumes of breath around him. Matthew. She opened her eyes wide. That's right, me. What are you doing here? Matthew was her classmate, the eternal joker and bully. And it was clear even then that he wasn't going to make a good boy. The police officer went to his house as if he were at work, but Matthew was respected by everybody. He was a bully, but he was fair. Here came a long time. I don't know, Matthew. For how long? A month? 2, 3. He looked at her strangely. You talk as if you were dying. I am. He looked dumbfounded. Matthew, are you married? Like to Sarah, remember the little chubby one from junior high? Oh, I remember. She's been chasing you since, like 5th grade. That's right. We have children too. 3, how many? You're a hero. Matthew sat down on the couch, waving his arm as a hero. I drink so I don't have to see the misery my family lives in. Can't do anything, you know. Nothing. No job, no money. I get drunk. At least I don't feel so ashamed. It's the only way we go out, at the expense of the farm. To town. What town, Sophie? 3 kids. You'd have to rent a big apartment, and it's not worth a nickel to pay everything for it and be left without everything again. Well, no, we'll have to figure something out. Farming. Matthew, you've always been good at this. Thought we were here. You see, there are some breeds of chickens, though I'll tell you about it later. I haven't got the money for it all anyway. We have to buy everything. What about you? Sophie sat down next to him. There's nothing to tell. Married. No kids. Sick. Husband brought her here so she wouldn't have to suffer. Matthew chuckled with me. What a joke you make. But Sophie was silent. The smile slid off his face. Sophie, are you serious? She nodded and finally cried Matthew and confusedly stroked her on the shoulder. You don't cry. Do you want me to get Sarah? We'll come to tea. We'll have a drink. We'll talk. We'll remember everything. Sophie nodded, then looked around the house. Matthew, did you get her right? We'll help you with that too. I'll just get your bags. Sophie smiled a little at the hangover. That's for when you have nothing better to do. Why now? He was able to move all the stuff in a minute. Well, you just set it down. I'm going home. He left and Sophie began unpacking her bags. What a thoughtful husband she had. Even all her makeup, all her jewelry, all folded. Probably so nothing would remind her of her. Sophie pulled out 3 pink bunnies. They always sat on her bed as interior decorations. The bunnies were the same in appearance, but different in size. Sophie cradled the toys in her arms, then tossed them on the couch. That's it. It was time to say goodbye to the past. An hour or so later, voices were heard in the yard. Sophie came out. Hi, Sophie. Sarah looked at her. Sophie remembered her like that. A plump little girl of small stature with a smile. They hugged, and Sarah spoke quickly. And Matthew was telling me about you, and I thought he was drunk. But he was so convincing, I had to go and see. And then I did. Would you stop it with the wet eyes? Look at the brigade I brought to you. Sophie looked at the 3 girls with amazement. They were about 2 years apart. They all looked like Matthew, but there was something of Sarah too. Wow, you guys are good. A whole kingdom of princesses. So, can we do that? Matthew laughed. Sophie threw him such a look that Matthew immediately became serious. They stayed at Sophie's until the evening and cooked and dined in the yard, and cleaned and washed and cleaned. To be honest, Sophie hadn't felt this good in a very long time. She didn't have to build anyone up, and she didn't have to endure hidden insults. In affectionate words, she was herself. The girls proved to be wonderful helpers. If it weren't for them, Sophie could see them looking at the bunnies, and when it was time to go home, she solemnly handed them so and handed them to them by height. But the older girl immediately gave the biggest bunny to the little one, and took the smaller one for herself. The little girl was jumping for joy. Sophie almost cried. Is this how it should be? They are each just for themselves. And in the evening, Matthew stoked the bath and came to get Sophie. Come on, let's go. Sarah, you're going to get it all out of you. You're going to be sick. Oh, Matthew, wait. At least I'll get something good for the girls. She took all the candy in a bag, then got it out of the fridge, which, thank goodness, worked, even though it was as old as Sophie the sausage stick. There was nothing else of that interest. Jack bought her only the essentials, but nothing. And he was in for a big surprise when he went into the box where they'd been saving for the new car, and she'd buy the girls some goodies later. At Matthew's and Sarah's, they stayed up until midnight. Sarah got her so steamed up that Sophie could hardly breathe at first, and then she felt so light in her body. She felt as if she could jump a little higher and fly to the moon. She asked Matthew about their plans. You see, we have a place where we can deliver a lot of broilers at once. We bring our own, but the chickens are small by weight, and there's a breed that's 3 months old and done. But to get into this business, you need money. It is necessary to buy chickens for a few to create the conditions for the eggs to survive, to build them a pen and feed. I can build it myself, but it's all just a dream. And what have you even counted? Sarah brought a notebook. Look at this. That's if you turn them in bulk. And this is a dream. That's if you open your own shop in the city with homemade products. Sarah, how much is that? I was counting with the reserve to go back and forth. It's not that much. Sarah closed her notebook. It's not much. Except we don't have that either. There's no work here. Allowance and my salary for clothes and things to buy. We eat mostly from the farm. So I'm not throwing all my dreams away yet, I think. What if I'm lucky? At night they walked her home. True, Sarah asked Sophie first. Would you like to sleep over tonight? No, Sarah, thank you very much. She needs to get used to her home. She was so tired. But the tiredness was pleasant. Sophie, as soon as she touched the pillow with her head, fell right into a deep sleep. At night she dreamt of chickens, lots of fat, beautiful chickens, and herding chickens was so strange. Sophie had a lot of fun in her dream. She woke up with a smile on her lips. She thought she woke up for no reason. But it turned out there was a knock on the door. Sophie threw her robe on and went to open it. Hello. Standing on the doorstep were the three girls' daughters, Matthew and Sarah. She had laughed yesterday when she had learned their names. It was as if the parents knew beforehand that they would only have girls. Hello. Come on in. We'll just be a minute. The oldest, Madison, put a bag on the table. Here's some milk and sour cream and stuff. You put it all out and give us the bag. We'll take it to Mommy. Sophie smiled. That's right. In the village, they always valued containers. You go for milk, you carry a jar. You carry a bag of apples. As the girls ran off, Sophie wondered how could it be. She doesn't know Sarah, per se, but she's more familiar with Matthew. They're going through a bad time themselves, and they sent her a whole bag. Is that how it works? The phone vibrated on the table. Sophie flinched, so unaccustomed to hearing it here. She held out her hand. Well, of course, Jack must have seen there was no money. Hello. Sophie, how could you? Why did you take the money? Oh, Jack, hello. I'm also filing for partition of the apartment. In 2 months, I'll probably be able to get mine back. What partition? Have you been drinking? What partition? What partition? You and I paid the mortgage equally. You kicked me out of the apartment. Half is mine. You know I always keep all my receipts in order. You wouldn't dare. He wasn't speaking fiercely anymore, but confused. And I dare you. You'll see soon enough. You buried me. Oh, early. I still have a lot to do. Sophie passed out. She only now realized what she had to do. And what she was about to do would be very much the right thing to do. She reached down to the very bottom. The bag pulled out a small bag, counted out the money from the bag. It came out to about half of what was in there. Sophie hummed contentedly, put a few more bills in her pocket. She hid the rest of the money under the couch. The little one also had a hiding place set up there. Sarah was in the yard weeding the flower bed. The girls were hanging around. Some were helping, and some were getting in the way. Hi. Sarah turned around. Hi, Sophie. How'd you sleep? I slept great. Sarah. Where's Matthew? He's in the garden somewhere. He's so upset, but he's worried about you. Sophie smiled for the second day. Well, you see, everything has an upside. Sarah waved her hand. What are you talking about? What is it? Sophie turned to the girls. Go and get Daddy. I need to talk to him. Yes, and Mom. Sarah looked at her in surprise. What happened, Sophie? Don't worry, nothing bad happened. 5 minutes later, they were sitting at the table. Sarah poured tea for everyone. Sophie put the money on the table. Here, anyway. This is for your business. For your chickens. Matthew and Sarah looked at the money. Finally, Matthew said to Sophie, we really appreciate what you're doing now, but we're not taking the money. We just won't have anything to give if something doesn't work out. Now Sophie felt that Matthew, no matter how much of a wreck he was still the head of the family, and no one doubted it. Sarah, in agreement, nodded after her husband's words, but Sophie didn't lift a finger. It is out of the question. And besides, who are you going to give them back to? I won't be here. I have no heirs. It's from the heart, isn't it? Don't insult me. You have no idea what it's like to know that at least in the last days of life, you were able to make someone a little happier. The couple was silent for a while. Then Matthew said to Sophie, "Honestly, you have no idea what you've done for us now. Don't you worry. It's going to be just right." Matthew jumped up and hugged Sophie, then Sarah, then picked all the girls up and spun them around the room. "Sarah, Sophie, we're going to make it, and we're going to have another boy." Sarah laughed. "That's it. Let it go. No boys. That's enough. Nothing is enough for us anymore. There must be a son." Sophie looked at them and realized that this was happiness. Happiness is knowing how to be happy, not trying to learn, not trying to force yourself to be happy, not pretending to be happy. Michael stared at one point in front of him. It was strange how life was working out. He met a woman for whom he was willing to do the most reckless things. She was gone. She did not even try to be different, did not even try to take a step toward her happiness. And yet Michael saw the way she looked at him. He knew for a fact that she was not indifferent to him either. Yes, he is a doctor, and he understands. He had seen disease break people more than once. First mentally, and then physically. And people have given up, even when they could and should have fought it. Sophie broke right away. She didn't even ask if anything could be done. She just walked away with a doomed look on her face. The phone rang on the table. "Yes, I'm listening." Michael, I have great news for you." "Nicholas, hi. What's the news?" "Remember when you sent that woman's test results to your friend?" "I remember, of course." Michael felt his heart racing. "Anyway, so I sent them to an acquaintance of mine. He works with similar cases now." "Really? I didn't know about it." "They're recruiting for experimental treatments at their clinic. He's convinced that your protégé has a good chance. You need to send her information right away so they can sign her up. And I'll take her to the clinic." Michael didn't say anything. "Michael, why didn't you say something?" "She's gone. She went home to her husband. Said she didn't need anything. How her husband just gave up on her too. He didn't try to talk her out of it." "Michael, I don't understand you. From what I understand, you care about a woman, and that you're just going to sit with a husband like that. She's twice as fast. What do you suggest I do?" "Do what?" "Go save everything in your hands. If he doesn't want to, make him." "Michael, you what?" Michael listened and realized that he really is, how can I put it mildly, an idiot. He didn't care. Even if Sophie never reciprocated, he would save her. At least he'll know she's alive. "Nicholas, write down the data. I'll find her." This is our way of dictating. Michael came and rang the doorbell 3 times already. It's strange that all normal people get off work at 6 o'clock. Well, maybe 8. It's 10 o'clock here, and nobody answers. He sat down again on the windowsill in the entryway. It's okay. It can wait. He'll have to. He'll stay up all night. About 15 minutes later, he heard footsteps. Michael stood up, but it was a woman. She eyed him suspiciously and began to open the door, which was next door to Sophie's. "Excuse me, please. Can I ask you some questions?" The woman staggered back frightened. "Do not be afraid. I am a doctor. I was treating your neighbor, Sophie. You see, they are waiting for her in a good clinic, so there's hope for a good outcome. I can't find her." "Is that how Sophie got sick?" "You're serious. You're very clear. I thought it was Jack who made such a fuss about sending her away. He's doing something with the apartment. He took her. Where did he take her?" "I don't know. I saw him loading bags out the window this morning. Lots of bags. So he took her away for a long time for good." Michael sighed. "You see, there's not much left. The sooner I find her, the better chance she'll be cured. Where could he have taken her?" The neighbor was upset, and she threw up her hands. "I don't know, honestly. Jack's an infestation. It's his mama that's muddying the waters." "Wait a minute, though. Of course, it's a fantasy. Sophie has a house in the country somewhere far away. but I don't remember the name of the village. I've got it written down somewhere, so I'll look for it." She went into the room, and Michael was already moving impatiently. Surely Sophie had said she had a house. She was definitely there. She must be there. Otherwise, he wouldn't know where to look for her then. The neighbor's back. "Here, look," she found it. She handed him a piece of paper torn from a notebook. He read the name of the village. "Thank you very much." "You're welcome, as long as she's there. As long as it's okay. Will you tell her if you find out her hubby's doing something with the apartment?" I will." He almost ran down the stairs. "If you leave right now, you could be at the clinic in the morning." James stopped in the middle of the village. Well, what to do? It's already dark. The houses are still lit, of course. Just wouldn't meet him with a gun or a pitchfork. He was not very familiar with village life, though he had always been drawn to live in such places for a while. There was nothing to do. He had to knock somewhere. He drove closer to one of the houses, and a shadow immediately separated from the gate. It was a big dog. He barely had time to get into the car and shut the door. Not bad. Okay, let's try somewhere else. But the dogs went up all over the village. Michael decided he would drive up to every house. Maybe someone will come out, or maybe the dogs won't turn up somewhere. Sarah, Sophie, and Matthew sat at the table. They were counting, thinking. Matthew had almost finished building the pen and feeders. There was only a couple of days left to go. Matthew was unrecognizable. He'd cut his hair. He hadn't had a drink in over a week. Sophie saw the looks Sarah was giving her husband. For herself, she thought to herself, be her son unequivocally. Well, that seems to be it. Everyone had double-checked everything. 5 times we've counted Matthew lets us go. We're sleepy. Sarah looked pitifully at her husband. He smiled. We'll get some sleep later. Sophie, will you come with us? What do you need in the city? No, I won't go myself, but I'll write a list. All right. Will you keep an eye on the girls here? Sophie laughed. They're the ones looking out for me, so I'm well protected by Madison, Brianna, and Kaylee. They make me eat and throw me out in the air. Matthew smiled. His girls had really taken over Sophie. They took care of her like a little girl. Either one of them had heard the talk about Sophie having very little to live for, or they just liked her. But the girls wouldn't take a step away from her. Sarah turned to the window. What are the dogs making a fuss? Like a wolf? What kind of wolf? Sarah and our side. No wolves. There haven't been any wolves for 20 years. Look, there's a car stopped. I'll go take a look. Matthew, Sarah, settle down and don't watch any more detectives. Matthew went outside, and the women listened to what was going on. But nothing was heard. Nothing at all. About 10 minutes went by. It was like Matthew had disappeared. And Sarah got up. I stood outside. Sophie got up too, and I'm with you. They, without talking, took logs from the logs by the stove and moved toward the door. They didn't get very far. The door opened. Matthew and Michael looked at them in amazement. Not so much at them, but at what they had in their hands. Matthew couldn't take it anymore. He laughed so hard he even bent in half. Then, looking at him, Michael laughed too. The women stood in silence. Sarah was looking down at the floor, embarrassed. And Sophie, her eyes darted to Michael. Michael, where are you from? How are you even here? He, laughing, said I followed you. Sophie followed me. I do not understand anything. Matthew pushed Michael into Sarah's house. Make us some tea or coffee. A nice man is here. Sarah quickly set the table. Sophie thought how much she wanted to see him. And here he was. It just made her feel so bad. I wish I'd never seen him. Now she didn't want to die at all. Soon everyone was seated at the table. Michael began to speak. Sophie, the thing is, I have many friends in the medical world. Some of them we studied with. Some of them we crossed paths with in our professions. We all communicate and try to help each other. When your tests came, I immediately sent them to a friend of mine. He works with your illnesses, but he said what I already knew, but offered to show it to another acquaintance. Anyway, this acquaintance is recruiting a group of patients for an experimental treatment. As you understand, it's a risk, but it's a chance, and it's not a bad chance, and he said so right away. I took the liberty of signing you up, and then I rushed to your house. And you were gone. Thank you. A neighbor told me where you might be. By the way, she said to tell you that your husband's doing something with the apartment. I really don't know. That tomorrow at 8 you have to go to the clinic, otherwise someone else will take your place. There was silence at the table. Sophie felt so strange. She's supposed to die. And now, they were telling her there was a chance. She wanted so badly to believe it. But there was another thought. What if she believed it? What if she wanted to live again? And the treatment didn't help. She thought of the disappointment that would await her. Everyone was silent, as if they understood the struggle going on inside her right now. Finally, Sophie raised her head. I will go. Of course I'll go. Matthew exhaled. If you refused, I would personally tie you up myself and take you there. Okay, my darlings, we need to pack up and get some sleep for a couple of hours. Sophie, we have to leave before 4 o'clock. Let's get ready. We'll come and see you off. Sarah and Matthew walked Michael and Sophie to the car. Sophie got into the car and immediately felt embarrassed. Yes, she was sick, of course, but she was still a woman. She was madly in love with Michael, and they were going to spend a short night together. She quickly gathered everything she needed, spread out the couch for Michael, and returned to tell him that she could lie down. And he stood right behind her. Sophie herself did not realize how she found herself in his arms. They did not get any sleep. At 4 in the morning, they went outside. While Michael was putting her things away, Sarah took her aside. Sophie, are you glowing right now? That's what I think. Sophie nodded confusedly. Sarah suddenly became serious. Sophie, I'm very happy for you. So you have no idea. Please remember that there are always meanings in life. You must fight for yourself, for him. Do you hear me? Sophie looked firmly into her new friend's eyes. I will fight as hard as I can. I promise. They hugged each other tightly, and Sophie got into the car. Matthew walked over to her, looking out the window. Michael says the treatment is about 6 months. You don't have to worry. We'll keep an eye on the house for heating. Just in time for you to come back to open your store for us. Sophie laughed. Well, such an event I can't miss. I'll be sure to come. We'll be there. They were silent all the way to the city. Sophie could not speak until they were in town. When they stopped in front of the hospital, she asked Michael, I don't know what will happen next or if it will happen at all. But I'm asking you to help. I want to file for divorce and division of property. Even if nothing helps me, I want to go to the other world a free man. Of course I'll help you, but no one's going to leave. You and I still have so much ahead of us. Sophie was immediately admitted to the hospital. Her doctor, Christopher, looked like a madman. Like all geniuses, in fact. There were 2 other women in the room with her. They didn't call him anything but a genius. She was in her 2nd week in the hospital. Sophie had long ago sent Michael all the documents for the dissolution of the marriage. She wrote that she couldn't go herself because she was ill. She backed everything up with certificates. Michael said that there would be a public lawyer at the hearing, even though he is not really needed. It was clear enough as it was. She didn't want to see Jack or his mother, so she asked not to tell them where she was. It turned out that Jack had decided to sue for the apartment. The whole thing was dragging on, and Sophie understood him perfectly. If she died before the apartment was divided, he would get everything, so she just had to heal. The door opened. Sophie didn't tear herself away from the book because Michael wasn't coming tonight. He was on duty, and no one else was coming to see her. Look at her like we have nothing to do with her. Sophie looked up and almost squealed. Hannah and Caitlin were standing in front of her. Where in God's name are you girls from? She hugged and kissed them. The girls began unloading everything they had brought into the nightstand. Where are you going with all this? I'll never eat it. If you don't eat it yourself, you'll share it with the neighbors. By the way, Youre, Lord, name is Michael. Caitlin came to the appointment. He told me where you were and what was wrong with you. She called me. That's how we've been communicating since the hospital. And here we are. But I didn't say anything to Michael. The women looked at each other, Sophie confused. Well, yes, we're together. I don't know how much time we have, but I'm very happy. Hannah stroked her arm. It was obvious right away that you two were made for each other. You didn't have to fight it. Tell me about it. They talked for about 2 hours. By the way, Caitlin said her brother has his own dumpling shop, and he'd definitely love to buy homemade chickens and not just understand that he has like homemade food there. But to find all this homemade is very difficult. And if it's also in one place, it's just impossible. Do you talk to them? I'll talk to him. And let's talk tomorrow. Oh, Caitlin, that would be great. The next day, Sophie, like a real advertising man, was on the phone to Matthew, describing the benefits of such cooperation. Then she hung up the phone, satisfied, and said to herself, well, Sophie, you've had a lot going on lately, and you haven't had half this kind of activity before. And in the morning there Christopher came. Well, girls, we're ready to start treatment tomorrow. Each of you has a different course. You, Sophie, will have the hardest one. You have to be prepared for the fact that you want to go to the next world as soon as possible. From how bad you're going to feel. Too little time, you know. That's why we're going to treat you aggressively. What is it that requires your patience? Madison, you must eat. I'm telling you now, so you don't forget. Then you'll feel so bad that the very thought of eating will disgust you. But you must. You simply must. If you don't have any strength, your body can't handle it. You are ready, yes. She looked at him. I'm ready for anything. That's good. By the evening of the next day, Sophie had a good sense of what Christopher was telling her. The girls were not the least bit relieved. She saw that together was somehow easier. Michael came almost every day. He would sit by her bedside, telling her some funny stories. Sometimes, when she fell asleep out of impotence, he would just be silent and look at her. Sophie literally dried up. It seemed like a little more and her skin would be translucent. It had been 2 months since the treatment had begun. In other words, the time that fate had given her had already passed, and that gave her hope. After some more time, the treatment became less extensive, and Sophie was even able to catch her breath. Autumn was already coming outside. She slowly walked to the window. How beautiful it was. Michael had promised that he would take her outside today. She couldn't go all the way by herself yet. In the morning, there would be tests and a full examination. It would be a few days before she knew anything. Sophie, are you ready? She turned around. Michael was already standing in the room, with a wheelchair in front of him. The carriage is ready. Sophie suddenly remembered how she had resisted the same chair when she first entered the hospital. It seemed such a shame. Now she didn't care, as long as she got to the street. She inhaled deeply. It felt so good. Sophie, the woman, opened her eyes. Michael handed her an ice cream with a smile. It can't be. Maybe a cone, like the ones we had when we met. Jack sat at the table and listened to what his mother was saying to him, and she just wouldn't stop talking. I don't understand. I honestly don't understand why you don't do anything. Mom, what do you want me to do? He sighed tiredly, sat down. There had been no arguments with his mother since Sophie was no longer around. All his mother's attention had returned to him. She wasn't just tormenting him, she was keeping him alive. If Jack was late at work, or anywhere else for that matter, Mom would start calling after 3 minutes of lateness. Acquaintances even asked if he had remarried. He'd duck the call, but only in vain. Mother was always persistent. What do you mean? You know how it is. All the deadlines are up. 100%. Sophie, no longer alive. Yes. But I would have been told. Why would she be? Who are you to her? Practically a stranger. And don't forget you got divorced almost a year ago too. An idiot couldn't talk her out of it. Jack sighed again. Mom, you said it was all very well then. You wouldn't have to spend money on a funeral. Emily looked at him surprised. And what could you have corrected me? You have to understand that there's an apartment on the line. Didn't I know your wife worse than you did? Jack clutched his head at everything I did wrong to you. Tell me, Mom, don't you get tired of it? You should go for a walk. Emily pressed his lips. His mother is trying to make a fool of herself for you because you can't do anything and everything is wrong with you. She immediately shed a tear, watching her son closely. I'm sorry, don't cry. What do you suggest? She instantly calmed down before the court decision. We need to go to that village, find the grave, Sophie to take pictures. Well, to have the evidence and take it all to court. They're probably waiting for her because they don't know that there's no one to wait for her. Otherwise, they would have pulled the apartment away long ago. Jack knew his mother was right, but he didn't want to go there. He didn't want to go there. What if Sophie was alive? No, that was stupid. She was already having a hard time walking all the time to take a break, stopping. And that's a year. Well, we should probably get going, right? Okay, Mom, I'll go this weekend. You know what, I'm going with you. There's her house over there. Maybe we can sell it too. Mom, is it going to fall apart? She didn't have anybody but you. Mama was right. Only it was unpleasant from her words. We decided to drive early on Saturday morning to be back sooner. The car had been recently repaired, but Jack had spared the money and had the cheapest parts. Look, kid, it's up to you, of course. But those parts rarely last long. Of course, he didn't tell his mother about it. He didn't want her to give up the trip. Blamed it all on Sophie. If it wasn't for her, he would have bought a new car a long time ago. He'd never thought Sophie would be capable of taking the money and then threatening him. But that's okay. Now everybody got what they deserved. He'll go on Saturday and justice will be served. In fact, Jack was getting terribly tired of living with his mother at work and had an affair. There's nowhere to bring a woman because the apartment is for rent and his mother insisted on it. I do not understand. You have your own room here. You can get money, right? At first he liked it. Mom cooked a lot, always different things. But then he got bored. His mother watched not only every step, but every penny. He wanted some kind of certainty, to get away from my mother. True, he did not tell her about it, because there would have been a scandal. Sarah, what are you digging for? Matthew, stay out of my way. Sarah counted the glasses on the table. There was enough for everybody. I still have more to spare. I sure do. I sure do. And you're all set. Are you insulting me? Look. Matthew made a gesture with his hand. Sarah looked with a smile at where he was pointing. There stood their first big purchase, a big car. It was a car, of course, but it was so big and so much trunk that half their house would fit in there. The car had rings on it, white flowers. Matthew had driven into town yesterday to pick them up. Michael and Sophie didn't even know they were there. Matthew had a surprise for them. They're getting married in an hour. They decided to sign here, at the local village council, which was in the next village. They decided to do everything rustically, because in the next few years, Matthew and Sarah hoped that the young people would decide to live together for good. Sophie was prescribed fresh air in the village, and Michael was going nowhere from his Sophie. He was very happy to be hired as a paramedic. Tables were set in Sarah's yard with Matthew. Not many people were invited, only the best and the closest. Caitlin looked out of the house. We'll probably take the girls and go to the village hall. Sarah again looked over her daughters. All three were in pink bouffant dresses. Let's get going. You check over there. And Hannah. Hannah will stay to help you. You remember she's the master of ceremonies, don't you? Sarah laughed. You won't forget that. I shudder to think of last night's rehearsal. They laughed. Yes, yesterday they chased them around. Who stands where? Who says what? Caitlin's husband came into the yard. He was helping Matthew decorate the car. So, are we going? Yeah, let's go. The girls noisily loaded into the car with Caitlin and her husband. Sarah walked over to the car. Madison, Brianna, Kaylee, are you a present? Sophie fed moms, and walked. And he also pinched Aunt Caitlin's finger. How did he pinch her? He's just a little. Caitlin laughed, showed her finger, which was showing off the punctures from her teeth. Here, and I thought it was just a little one. And that little guy has very sharp teeth and not a very good temper. The car pulled away and Sarah went back to the yard. You drive them later, and Hannah and I will come back in a bunch. They loaded up the car and drove to Sophie's house. Sophie, to be honest, just wanted to sign quietly. Well, Michael, Sarah, Matthew, Hannah, and everyone else involved in her life lately just jumped on her. What are you trying to do? Take the holiday away from us? How could you not want Sophie's wedding? You what? And then she thought, and really, what was it? She remembered when she found out that the disease had receded. The risk is there, it always is, that she might come back, but small and almost negligible, as Christopher had said. He walked into her room that day, serious, even angry. Michael was at her place. The two of them looked at the doctor as if he were God. I wanted to scream, "Don't be silent, speak." But Christopher seemed to be stalling on purpose. He sat down, examined them from head to toe, and said, "Well, what are you waiting for?" Michael's cheeks went up, but the doctor raised his hand calmly. I had to pause to make it sound as solemn as possible. Sophie said softly, "Do you mean to say?" And then Christopher did something no one expected him to do. He jumped up and yelled, "We won. You are the heaviest, my sickest most." And we won. What happened to Sophie then? She cried. She laughed. She didn't understand. She couldn't yet understand that she didn't have to die. She could live the way she wanted to live. Sophie was looking at herself in the mirror now. She had chosen a floor-length dress with open shoulders. The dress was blue with a silver sheen. Catching admiring looks in the mirror, Michael turned to him. "What do you think of you? You are adorable. Sophie, you really are great." Matthew was standing on the doorstep. He was wearing a suit, so he looked important. "All right, enough of the complimentary exchanges. You're going to create a social unit, aren't you?" "The carriage is ready." Sophie looked out the window and laughed. "Matthew, why? We're adults now. I don't get it. Are you guys getting married or something?" "My girls have been cooking and getting ready since 5 in the morning. And the bride can't please. Sophie gave Matthew a little peck on the cheek. Michael immediately showed him his fist. On their way, Hannah hustled, handing out coins to rice to sprinkle on the young ones. Took a loaf herself. She was very responsible about what was entrusted to her. Or rather, she asked for it herself. To be precise, when she found out that they were going to make a wedding into an ordinary feast, she was so indignant that no one tried to change her mind. Everyone knew it was utterly useless. Sophie was as happy as she was beautiful. She looked at those who had come to congratulate them and smiled. In fact, all she had been doing lately was smiling. Well, how could she, when life turns out to be so wonderful? Hannah announced the presentation of gifts. They were placed near a small decorated table, and everyone began to fold envelopes for them. It was all so exciting that Sophie lost sight of hers. Now her husband just wanted to ask where he had gone. As Hannah said loudly, "Every man has a dream. And so does our bride. Pardon me, young wife." So Michael decided that he should be the one to fulfill that dream. The next moment, Sophie gasped. Michael was walking toward her, holding a fat diver puppy in his arms. He was just a baby, really, the size of a young sheep. Here was Sophie. Just need to think of a name. Sophie took this miracle wonder in her arms, licked her cheek, wiping away a tear that had rolled away. "Michael, you are the best. You are the best. I love you so much." It was about an hour into the meal when Sophie turned to her guests. "We have to leave you for a while, but we will be back." "Sophie, where are you going?" The woman smiled sadly. "I used to live here with my grandmother. She's long gone, but I'm back in her house. Here again, where everything reminds me of that life. We will go to the cemetery. I have to tell her I'm happy." Some volunteered to go with them. Some stayed behind to wait at the table. Sophie took the flowers Sophie had prepared beforehand, and they went to the cemetery, which was just outside the village. The miracle that Sophie could never find a name for. Running around them. Look, there's a car. Someone has arrived. Sarah tugged her husband by the sleeve. Well, here we are, and here we are, doing our own thing. It's a miracle. Where did you go? The puppy darted off into the back of the cemetery, barking loudly at someone. You can't call it that. There was more. Told the idiot, let's ask someone. Mom, stop calling me an idiot. How do you imagine it? A woman had to die. Where could we find her grave? Emily hummed. What do you think? We have to wander around the cemetery for 2 hours looking for something better. Maybe she died in the hospital altogether. Then they buried her in town. Why didn't you think of that before? How can I not call you an idiot if you can't think of anything yourself? Before she could answer Jack, a puppy came bouncing out from under their feet, yapping loudly. Yuck, you bastard, you scared me. Well, we're about to find out. Jack hummed. You question the dog. That's very clever. Emily's mom sighed. Of course he's not an idiot. The puppy is purebred clean. It is clear that he does not live here, but came with someone. Jack looked away angrily. He could have guessed that on his own. Miracle. Jack thought he heard a familiar voice. He turned and saw his mother clutching at her heart. Dibs on me. Sophie was rushing toward them. Or rather, it was Sophie and not Sophie. She was very beautiful, ethereal, in a dress that looked like it was glowing. She saw them too, and stopped like a stone. The puppy rushed to her, wagging his tail happily. You. Sophie. Jack had already realized that Sophie was no ghost at all. She is very real and insanely beautiful. He wanted to say something, but then a whole crowd of people approached Sophie. It was clear from the clothes that people were attending a wedding, and whose wedding it was also easy to understand. Sophie, are you getting married? Jack looked at her confused. Yes, something's wrong. But now that you're cured, you're supposed to come back to me. He knew he was talking nonsense, but he couldn't help it. Yes, Sophie had just lied to him. She was going to die. Now the big, beautiful mother had pushed him. What are you standing up for, you idiot? You can't do anything at all in this life. You'll live with me for the rest of your life. God, I should have given birth to such an idiot. She started walking toward the exit. Everyone standing next to Sophie parted to let her pass, and Jack just stood there, staring at them. Finally, Matthew said, I think we should go that way. There's nothing noteworthy here. Look, man, I just got it right though. Were you and your mommy looking for Sophie's grave here? Jack was silent. He was well aware of how it all looked now, and to say he was just taking a stroll here wouldn't quite be appropriate. Matthew took a step toward him. What a scumbag you are, man. Michael added a lie. Stop calling him a man. He's Mama's child. Slug. Let's go already. They turned around and walked down the path. After a minute, and Jack went to the exit. I wanted to cry. I wanted to fall to the ground and tap my feet, but he would prove to everyone that he was a man. The idiot came. Jack calmly got behind the wheel, turned to his mother. One more word and I'll throw you out of the car and you'll walk into town. Emily even began to gasp for air with indignation, but something in her son's gaze told her. She closed her mouth and decided that she would somehow keep quiet until the city. But then hang in there, son. They came back from the table, and an hour later Miracle, who seemed to be called that, was stretched out under the table in the shade. Matthew was filling glasses. Sarah set hers down and took a juice. Sophie smiled. Something extravagant was about to happen. She and Sarah hid the mystery as best they could. Michael helped quietly do an ultrasound at the most permissible due date to see who Matthew looked at his wife in surprise. Why don't you drink to the young one's health? Don't worry about it. You've got a lot of helpers, don't you? They'll wash everything and bring everything. That's not why I'm here. Matthew put the glass down too. He wiped it off his suddenly sweaty palm. Why did Sarah smile? Well, why? That's what you ask your son. There you have it. Sign it. That pause and that look was the envy of the coolest artist of the entire cinematic era. Matthew coughed, and then he cried and hugged his wife. I thought never again. Sarah was so confused. She had never seen Matthew cry before. She quickly led him away. Hannah, who was also wiping her eyes, proclaimed loudly. How bitter Sophie and Michael stood up embarrassed. He managed to whisper to her, I feel like a teenager. Sophie smiled, and I did. They walked until just before dawn. The kids were tired and slept as a bunch across the couch in the house in the middle of the house with Miracle spread out on his back. He too was very tired today. Matthew was drunk, so Hannah and Caitlin had to help him to bed. You don't understand. I'm having the biggest day of my life. Hannah laughed. And when my son is born, then what is it? Matthew wondered. Yes, it will be more important then. I'm going to bed. Did he kiss Sarah? Are you my favorite? Yes, she laughed. Go already a father of many children. But Matthew didn't settle down until he had kissed all of his princesses. Sophie watched everything, sitting in Michael's tight embrace. Until a year ago, the world had seemed black and white to her, even more like Blackmore. Now she understood that life is a wonderful happiness that can be found at every corner. The main thing was not to run away from it, not to hide. Michael, you have no idea how much I love you. You don't know how happy I am. Why not? I can imagine a little less than I do. I mean, Sophie looked at her husband in surprise. Well, no matter how much you love, I'm still bigger, no matter how happy you are. And I'm still bigger. Well, Michael, don't argue with me. I'm the husband. It's not proper to argue with a husband. They laughed, and Michael held her even tighter to him.